otherwise known as SIB, and behavior management tonight. So on our agenda, we'll talk a little bit about self-injurious behaviors. What do those look like? Some of us might have experienced what those look like before or just have experienced them at all. And we'll talk about functions of behavior in terms of maybe the why behind some of these behaviors and why they're happening. We'll talk about some of the management techniques that aren't going to be a one size fits all, but hopefully some good guidelines for anyone that might be experiencing an individual with, a challenging behavior. And that includes antecedent modifications. Those are things that we do prior to the behavior to help prevent it from happening. A consequence intervention. So what do we do when the behavior is happening? And replacement behaviors. So those are the things that we want to see. It's the good stuff that we want to increase for, all of our individuals with special needs. And then we'll kind of put it all together and do a little bit of Q&A. All right, just to break the ice a little bit, would anyone like to share anything that they've been doing since it's kind of a crazy time and we're in a pandemic and we're all inside and now it's winter and maybe it's cold where you are and we're social distancing? Does anyone have any fun stuff to share or any resources to share? And that can be in the chat as well. Board games, stories, movement. I love it. It's perfect. Okay. Any other things that you guys have going on that's kept you busy? I myself have been trying to work on new hobbies and hope that my puppy doesn't get too bored. We've adapted a game of hide and seek with ourselves. Or any other resources. More board games. Yeah, I love that. A lot of board games. I know I've done more board games this year too. Well, that's super fun. Thank you everyone for sharing. So just to kind of dive in a little bit, behavior management, like I said, it's not necessarily going to be a one size fits all type thing. You'll definitely want to kind of fit what's going to work best for your child, or, things might vary from children to adults to teenagers to adolescents. So this is just going to be some guidelines here that we'll talk about today. So as a BCBA, I hear it a lot, how do I stop my child from engaging in, let's insert this challenging behavior here. So how do I stop my child from hitting his sister, from, maybe hitting themselves? How do I stop my child from running off when we're in the parking lot at the grocery store? And some of that stuff might sound a little familiar to some people. What I always ask parents to do is to flip that question around. So today, we're going to focus on what those behaviors look like, but we're also going to talk about how do I teach my child, insert this appropriate behavior here. So how do I teach my child to ask for their wants and needs? How do I teach my child to tell me that they're hungry? Or how do I teach my child to keep himself occupied whenever, I'm trying to make dinner? Things like that. So we'll talk about that a little bit today too. Okay. And just from everyone that's in here, does anybody have firsthand experience with self-injurious behaviors? Maybe with someone you know, maybe you've heard about it, maybe you've seen it on a TV show. Anybody? And you can unmute yourselves too if that's easier. And it's okay if we haven't had experience with it, because that's a good thing. It's definitely not a bad thing. For those that are familiar with it, you could maybe speak to it. For those that aren't as familiar with SIB, that would be instances where someone is causing harm to themselves. So that self-injury is what we're seeing. So That could come in different forms, things that we're seeing that they're doing. Maybe it's head banging, banging against an object, against a floor, against a wall. Maybe it's biting themselves. So maybe it's biting inside their mouth or their fingers or another body part. Maybe it's hitting themselves. So, maybe with an open or a closed palm. And maybe it could be something like throwing your body to the ground. So maybe if there's an individual who's really just having a tough time and, kind of is injuring themselves in that way of just flopping to the floor and could cause some concern. I know self-injury is a little bit more of a concerning behavior because we obviously want all of our individuals to remain safe. So it can be kind of scary when the causes might be unknown. So maybe it's something that's happening that seems to be out of the blue or, random, which isn't a word that we love in behavior analysis because we try to find the reason behind it. If it is something that might be, a little unclear in that moment, it could be something like internal pain. Maybe a child who has a headache has a little bit of relief by hitting their head against something. So that would be something to talk to the doctor about. We always want, and as behavior analysts, we always ask that our parents rule out anything medical first. So if that's something where an individual is able to tell you and maybe you're able to take care of it that way. Unfortunately, a lot of the times we don't know and the individual isn't able to say if maybe their tooth hurts or their head hurts or something might be hurting. So that's when we kind of want to rule out anything medical through the doctor. And that just, means that maybe this is something that's medical and it could be solved by a visit to the doctor, or maybe it's behavioral, and that's whenever, us as behavior analysts would step in. So maybe part of that unknown cause is that, they don't have attention in that moment and they're maybe inappropriately seeking attention in that moment. So that might sound very similar to some people. Or maybe it's just kind of a sensory feeling. So maybe the way that, that motion or that action feels just kind of is very self-rewarding, self-reinforcing to them. So that's kind of, the part that we try to figure out is that reason why. And it's important to target that SIB as well, because, depending on the severity, it can be dangerous. It can be something where, we don't want a broken bone to happen or some sort of, malformity whenever that bone is reconstructing its way back, or it could be life-threatening too. So it's definitely something that's important to target, no matter what the situation. And that's also because it's not a way to get what we want, it's something where we want to create these socially significant behaviors with all of our kiddos and our adults and teenagers and adolescents, because we want everyone else to know what they want and need as well. Because I'm sure as parents or as aunts and uncles or as grandparents, working closely with each of these individuals, you probably have a really in-tuned sense of what it is that they want in that moment. In the times that it's not unclear, maybe they're hungry, maybe they're thirsty, maybe they're just really tired. That's where we would want to create a socially significant behavior in order to replace the inappropriate ones. And then the replacements that we're teaching are just pivotal skills for a lifetime too. So it's just very important to be able to, teach these skills that we hope will last as long as possible. Oh, sorry, the chat box just popped up for me for those that were putting stuff in before. So sorry about that. Okay. So let's talk about that why a little bit more. So for functions of behavior, that is just kind of giving us a little bit more insight into that situation. So typically we can start to pinpoint what these functions might be by observing it and maybe even testing out a few theories as well. So in a functional analysis, as we would call it. So these are our 4 standard functions of behavior through behavior analysis. And there are other functions to consider as well. So maybe if an individual also has, anxiety, I know someone said that in the chat box. That's a very prevalent thing with individuals with special needs. There might also come a high level of anxiety. Maybe it's, boredom sometimes too. Those aren't explicit functions, but it's definitely good things to keep in mind. Or things like control. So maybe if an individual really wants to be in control of a situation. So let's start with attention, because that's probably the most, parent-friendly word of all of our functions too. I'm sure there's been a lot of times where you guys might have experienced, you're doing something or you're working, maybe you're working from home right now and all the kids are home right now too, and they want your attention. So thinking about how is my child, how is, my cousin, my niece, my nephew, how are they trying to get my attention, in this moment? Is it appropriate? Is it maybe not appropriate? I'm sure you guys have experienced all sorts of situations like that. And then tangible is another function that we look at too. So tangible would be, some of those like access to any sort of person or place or thing. Most often might be, some sort of tangible item that they really love. So a lot of my kids that I work with, their most coveted tangible item is the iPad. Is videos, it's YouTube. They love the iPad. And so I might say that I see the most, challenging moments whenever, the iPad is taken away. So I would call that a tangible function. Maybe it's something a little bit different than that. Maybe it's, mom is leaving for work in the morning and, maybe that's upsetting to her child and they really want access to mom and they don't have that at that moment, or it's being removed. Maybe it's going to Target. Maybe since, we're all missing the stores right now, maybe, there's an individual who really loves going to Target and that's just not always an option, especially, wearing masks and trying to keep your distance. And maybe they're not a big fan of the drive up pickup options. That could also be a form of tangible seeking behavior. If you think tangible, like things you hold, but it could also be things that maybe, you can't necessarily hold, but you can see or interact with. And then we have escape. So that might also be a very common one. If you think about all things that we try to escape in our daily lives, I am escaping my dishes right now. So thank you, Renan. And escape can come in many different forms too. Maybe it's, escaping homework. Maybe it's escaping a room. Maybe it's escaping a person that maybe they're not too fond of, like the dentist or the doctor. It could be in a lot of different forms too. And then we have sensory or automatic. So those are very self-reinforcing behaviors. And I touched on that before too, but automatic behaviors would be more of those that don't require another person in order to have that almost self-satisfaction. So it's something where the person really might just find enjoyment from them doing something themselves. Maybe it's, outside of SIB, it could be hand flapping, or it could be some sort of object in front of our face, or it could be maybe jumping up and down or running around. I know there's a lot of restless kiddos right now. So those would be all forms of different types of sensory seeking or automatic behaviors. Any questions on functions of behavior? And I have the chat open now. I can see that. Okay, well, we'll get into a little bit more of an interactive piece anyways. So I would love to hear or read, whatever that might look like, examples of what you guys might have experienced for all of these. So let's start with escape. Does anyone feel comfortable sharing an example of escape that they might have experienced with an individual with special needs in their lives? I have a ton of escape stories, so I can always come up with some too. Or any of the other functions too. Yeah, students escaping from a task, absolutely. Maybe it's, oh, I have to go to the bathroom, or, oh, I need to sharpen my pencil. Those could be considered escape, absolutely. What about tangible or attention? Those might be very common ones within the home environment, because I know in the classroom we might be, placing a few more demands than at home. So maybe there's some tangible or attention circumstances you guys might have come across, if anyone would like to share. I can think of even just a few today. I had a student that needed help with something, but they weren't asking in the most appropriate way. It kind of turned into more of a large frustration episode. So I would consider that a little bit of tangible, a little bit of attention. Yeah, or when there's a difficult task, yeah, if someone threatens to hurt themselves, definitely that would be escape. Yeah. Okay. Interrupting while talking to someone else by hitting themselves. Okay. Yeah, thank you guys for sharing. And that's something where, we'll talk about some replacements that we can do too. Disrobing when upset. Yeah, and maybe that's one of those unclear things where maybe they're upset because, they're frustrated with a task. Maybe they're upset because, they don't have access to a toy or the tablet or their computer or their video games. Yeah, definitely. Thank you guys for sharing. Okay. Moving on. So let's talk about antecedent modifications. So things that we, as those that are teaching these individuals, try to do to prevent the behavior and create learning opportunities. So first, what I like to do, and if it's possible too, because sometimes it's a little hard and sometimes it's a little unclear, and that is totally fine. But I like to try to identify a precursor. So maybe there's a certain task that I know every single time that I present homework to my 10-year-old, he is going to, get upset. Or maybe for my 5-year-old that's nonverbal, maybe he engages in a certain sound, like an ah sound, that when I start to hear that, I know that he is about to engage in SIB, and I want to make sure that I'm there to block it if it does happen, or redirect, or offer any of these other choices that might help to prevent that. So a precursor is helpful. It's not always a thing though. Not our kids don't always, or anyone, we don't always have that precursor where they're kind of giving us a little hint of what's to come. So what we want to do then, if it's maybe an individual who we know might engage in SIB several times a day, and we want to make sure that we're not creating any unsafe scenarios, maybe we just want to have something present at all times that's really soft to block. So maybe it's a pillow, maybe it's some sort of soft sweater that we can have them wear, or Maybe it's some sort of, I like to use garden kneelers. I don't know if people know too much of what that is anymore, but whenever my grandma would go to the garden and she would put this cushion down for her knees so she could, continue gardening. I can find them on Amazon now for, you know, $5, $10. And I find that to be a really useful tool because it's something that you can have a grip on it. Usually it has a hole so you can carry it, and it's very mobile to be able to be used as like a way of blocking a behavior from happening, especially one that's a little bit more unsafe like this. So, for example, I have a kiddo right now that I work with who, he might flop to the floor first and bang his head on the floor. I want to encourage my therapists to not use their hands. And I would encourage everyone here to do the same because it can just be a little more unsafe for your hands. We don't want anyone to get hurt in the process of trying to block that behavior. So that's why I say have something soft like a cushion or that garden kneeler. And then it just kind of offers something for safety in that moment too. So another option that we can do to help prevent that would be communication opportunities. So that's what we're huge on in ABA especially. There's a lot of research and there's a lot of things out there for functional communication. And that just means that we're using communication for a reason. So if our reason is access to someone's attention, so if you're talking to someone else, just like we said in the chat, then offering some sort of communication to that instead of maybe engaging in hitting themselves. So that could be like a tap on the shoulder, or it could be maybe a peck to get someone's attention, or an AAC device where you hit a button and it says the person's name. Or maybe it's a vocal response. So maybe it's like saying, "Hey mom," like, or "Look at me," or anything that might be more appropriate in that moment to get that person's attention. And then it comes in with all the other different functions too. So if it's access to some sort of item or person, tangible functions, then we can offer them, the words to be able to say, "I want this, I need that, can I have it?" Things like that, so that not only do we know what it is that they want, but everyone else will know what they want too. So they could walk up to their teacher at school and ask for the same thing. They could hopefully not talk to strangers, but if they had to, they could and go up to them and ask for whatever it is that they need in that moment. So communication is really just key. I'm a big proponent of communication as just a really big solution for all of it. And then maybe if it's escape, if it's like a difficult task, if it's homework, if it's chores, if it's, escape from a younger sibling, breaks could also be offered in that moment too. So that's something where, when we're working in our center and we're working on sitting maybe for extended periods of time, or maybe we're working on harder homework or any sort of academic task, then we'll start with a certain time period. So, okay, 1 minute of work will equal, 1 to 2 minutes of a break. And then we start to slowly increase that. So we're kind of almost teaching that opportunity to ask for a break. And again, that goes into the communication opportunities too. Or just even offering a break, saying, "Okay, let's take a break from this. We'll come back to it later." And that, hopefully would work for most people. You might have, contact with someone that has a hard time transitioning back to it. So there are other transition modifications that I like to make too. So maybe it's choices. Do you want to do your homework in the living room or the kitchen? Do you want to do 1 minute or 2 minutes of dusting or vacuuming, whatever that might look like at home? And can anyone else think of anything that they do at home or school or community, wherever that is, to be able to almost prevent that behavior from happening, or at least anticipate it? Sensory breaks. I love that. Yes, especially for those automatic behaviors. So maybe you recognize, like, okay, they're starting to look a little like dysregulated. Like, what should I be doing right now? Or here's access to, your weighted blanket. Or, are they wearing their compression shirt? Different things I've seen my kids do. And choices. Yes. I love the choices. I think that if you can offer a choice, it almost allows our students just a little bit more of control in that moment. So we're very sneakily saying, okay, we're gonna do homework, but do you want to do it over there or over there? Do you want to do math or do you want to do English? So offering those choices really does help too. Yes, and communication. Yes, I'm glad someone else here is the really big proponent for that too. So their wants and needs are huge. Yes. And it sounds like you guys have a pretty good grasp on that too. I think once we give them the power of their words, I mean, I love that there's no going back from there. And asking questions. Yeah. So maybe that's like checking in with them too. I love using zones of regulation, so kind of giving a color to our emotions. And I think a lot of speech language pathologists would agree too and work with this. But, maybe I'm in the blue zone. Maybe I'm sad or I'm tired. Maybe I'm in the yellow zone. I'm a little silly. I'm getting frustrated. Or maybe I'm in the red zone. I'm really mad right now. So how do we get back to green where I'm happy and I'm calm and I'm good to go? Another fan of zones of regulation. Love it. All right. Thank you guys. All right. So let's talk a little bit about consequence interventions too. So this is something where we're really big on this in ABA because oh yes, thank you for the website for zones of regulation. For those that don't know, yes, it's wonderful. And there's all sorts of resources elsewhere too that don't cost anything, and I love it. Okay. Anyways, so in ABA, our biggest principle is that just understanding that consequences are very important. It determines whether or not this behavior is going to continue or is it going to decrease. So, we always try to focus on increasing the good stuff and pushing down, ignoring maybe, or just not giving as much attention to the not so good stuff. So, depending on what the function is, and that's why we talk about functions of behavior, because it's so important to know why our individuals are doing what they're doing, because we want to appropriately respond to that. So if it's escape, we want to make sure that we're following through as much as we can. So maybe that means, I offered homework and that's like a trigger word. I know it's a trigger word for a lot of our individuals who are maybe even in that like 10 to 12 range. And, maybe he's, throwing himself to the floor, or maybe he's hitting himself in the head because I said the word homework, and it happens. So what can I do instead? Maybe I'll wait it out. Okay, looks like you're calm. Let's do 1 page of homework and then we can have a break. So it's not like we're taking away the homework because the hitting is happening. We just, want to make sure that we're setting up a safe environment, making sure they're okay. And then kind of offering that again. We still want to make sure that we're doing what we said we were going to do. I have a whole other lecture on the 7 steps to, have like listening in the home. But then what we're doing is we're hopefully bringing minimal attention to things like hitting. So we try to avoid bringing too much attention to it in a vocal way, where we don't want to say stop hitting, especially if it's an attention maintained behavior, because that could be something where, maybe if you're on the phone and then you start to see the hitting, if you're turning to them and saying stop hitting, then they're kind of getting that attention that they were seeking in the first place. So it's and I know it might sound a little crazy. I'm not telling you to ignore your child at all. Just kind of ignoring the behavior and redirecting it in a safe way. So we have our cushion, or we have our arm that's ready to block any of those instances. So I want to make sure that I'm blocking that it's happening, because we want to make sure that our individuals are safe. But I'm still talking on the phone because, maybe it's a really important phone call. Maybe it's something I really have to do, or, maybe it's a relative that I haven't seen in almost 8 months and I really want to talk to them. So what we're doing is we're blocking it, and then, we're still kind of carrying on, like, okay, life still goes on a little bit, but we're gonna, redirect it. And once it stops, then maybe we prompt again and say, okay, if you need to get mommy's attention, you could say mommy, or you could tap my shoulder, or maybe grab a sibling or someone else in the family to help out too, to be that second prompter, to teach that appropriate skill. But once that behavior has stopped, and then we really want to amp up our rewards for the good behaviors. So we really want to give praise so much whenever we do see that good stuff, see them using their words, or see them tapping you on the shoulder, or see them asking for a break. Because once a child, or really any individual, I work with children mostly, that's why I say child a lot. Once they're kind of recognizing that, I'm getting way more attention from mom and dad, or from grandma, or from my brother, whenever, I use my words, that kind of almost clicks for them. And it's like, okay, I'm going to do more of this good stuff. And then I'm going to get that attention. I'm going to get to escape this task. I'm going to get that tangible item that I've been seeking out so much. And hopefully that makes sense. And hopefully, I know it's easier said than done in certain situations, but we'll talk about that too. So again, once the SIB has stopped, we want to redirect back to our antecedents. So you say, okay, great. I love that you have a calm body. Okay. Do you want to do your homework at the table, or, on the floor, if that's an option? I know that's not always an option. Or, hey, tell me what it is that you want. Let's use our words. That way we're separating those instances too. And stop me, guys, if you have any questions. Okay. So then we get into replacement behaviors. And this is kind of like a little spiel of, how I write my behavior plans. So whenever I have a student that maybe has a more challenging behavior, or behavior that we would just kind of like to replace it with some other stuff, some of that good stuff that we were talking about, then I'll write a behavior plan, and I'll make sure that the parents are on board with that too. And we'll make sure that all the therapists that work with them are feeling the same way. More often than not, I'll put functional communication in my replacement behaviors, because like we've kind of reiterated already, and I could say it a thousand more times, but communication, someone said it best in the chat, it gives them the control. They get their wants and needs. This is important. And sometimes, it depends on what that is. So maybe it's really important that they learn to ask for a break, because maybe it works really well at home. It works really well in ABA. And, this could be something they use at school. And Renard can speak to this too, but schools love whenever we're consistent with each other. It really is a special thing. And then sometimes as a replacement, appropriate sensory input might be part of that too. So maybe it's, we don't jump on the couch, but maybe we jump on the trampoline or jump on the floor. There's all sorts of different types of appropriate sensory input. So if a child is engaging in SIB and it is under an automatic or sensory seeking function, can be a little trickier to replace that, but maybe there's something else that, can be used instead. So maybe instead of kind of poking at their eyes, maybe what they can do is get a kaleidoscope, because maybe that looks really cool too. And we're getting the same function out of that. So it depends on kind of what that looks like and if there is those appropriate sensory items, but it's definitely something that can be, thought of or brainstormed. And then sometimes for a replacement too, especially for those escape maintain behaviors, I love to build those listener skills. It's important to be able to follow instructions. And I mean, that goes for anywhere. If you're at the store, if you're in the parking lot of a store, you definitely want them to follow instructions. If they're at school, they're being asked instructions all day. If, it's at home, there's always going to be opportunities where parents are going to be, asking their child or their teenager or whoever it is, to follow some sort of instruction. And that's an important skill to have in a lot of respects. Okay. So let's put it all together a little bit. Whenever we are talking about this stuff, I know I said earlier a couple times, it's not one size fits all. So just out of curiosity, is anyone here receiving services for someone in their family or someone that they know, maybe ABA, or would you guys be willing to share in the chat or out loud?
Hi, my name is Khalada.
Nice to meet
I
you.
am receiving ABA services for my son. The main, I think the reason I was listening to the chat, and we have been connected with the MUHSEN in their Sunday school too. And my son lately, he is picking his skin a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and that's I think the first of ever we noticed any behavior towards himself like this kind of behavior. Like normally he
Yeah,
is not doing anything like that. Like he'll run around or jump or do the things, but
sure.
nothing like hurting himself. But
Okay.
that's the first one, and we were just wondering what started. It seems like it's more like stimulatory. We tried giving him like different things that he can hold in his hand, or those different toys to play with or something, but he doesn't
Yeah.
want to hold anything in his hand or anything.
Okay.
Just want to pick his skin and maybe
Yeah.
and sometimes just like scratch his face or something like that.
Okay. Yeah, I've seen that. I've worked with a kiddo before who would like pick out his lip and stuff, or like the inside. Um, yeah, and if you guys are receiving ABA too, if you haven't already told your BCBA, it would be great to coordinate with them. Because obviously I don't want to overstep my bounds. I have little tidbits here and there, but you guys should always consult with your BCBA or your behavioral provider. But maybe there's other things that we can find that would be appropriate to kind of almost pick at. So like stickers, if you think about how when you're playing with stickers, you have to kind of use that like pincer motion, and you have to kind of really pick at it to get it off the page. If you really like stickers, that might be an option. Or any other
Well,
sort
I
of
feel like he's usually doing it when he's like doing nothing.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Like kind of during when it's like it doesn't happen in school or during the sessions or playtime.
Gotcha.
But I just found it. I'm like, oh goodness, you were doing it. Like sometimes maybe watching iPad or just like a stimulatory thing.
Okay, yeah. So, yeah, maybe some like leisure activity skills might be good to work on, something to kind of almost teach that redirection naturally, because sometimes it can be hard for us to, or any of the children or adolescents that we work with, it can be hard to kind of think of those leisure activities to busy our time with. I think a lot of us kind of think that leisure skills come a little bit more naturally, but really sometimes it's something to work towards, and it's something to, really build those skills into their repertoire. Because obviously, I mean, ABA is wonderful for its one-on-one, but there are moments where he's going to be alone at home, or, you're going to be cooking dinner, or you're going to be working or driving somewhere, or goodness knows what. But it would be good to maybe even work on some of those leisure skills too, to kind of almost teach that, okay, if we're bored, what can we do mentality.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Or someone in the chat also said Velcro. I like that. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. So, yeah, making sure that you guys are kind of consulting with any BCBA you work with or behavioral provider, just because, I can give some very general advice, but I don't know all of your kiddos or your individuals or teenagers or adults or anything like that. So it's good to kind of have that attention that, might come from someone that sees what's going on too, because a lot of what we do in ABA is based on that observation. But I will offer whatever I can. And then what your BCBA or behavioral provider or teacher or whoever you're working with will likely do is create that approach, that those teaching opportunities based on all those functions that we talked about too. So again, if a child is engaging in a behavior, because they want someone's attention, but we think it might be escape, and then we end up giving them a break or something that could be inadvertently reinforcing that attention that they're actually seeking. So that's why we try and keep in mind what those functions are. Visuals, those can also be very helpful. I am a big proponent of visuals. I know I work with a lot of visual learners, but maybe an activity schedule is something that would help our learners to be able to see what's coming, especially for things like a difficult task or homework or things like that. Or school sometimes, like maybe the transition out the door is the hardest thing in the morning. And I've worked with so many families that would agree with that. So a visual schedule could help, a first then board. There's a lot of visual opportunities too. And then, of course, like I said, we want to observe. We want these decisions to come based on our observations. And as a BCBA, I want to talk to parents too. I want to talk to the caregivers. I want to hear what is being experienced outside of just what I'm seeing, because so many times, one person could be different in one location than another. Home is different than school. School is different than the park, and the park is different than Target or the grocery store. So it's good to kind of observe and hear what's going on in all facets. And then just making sure that all of those safety materials are on hand too, to make sure that all of our individuals are as safe as possible. So maybe that is, I've worked with a child before who wore a helmet and some gloves to prevent any sort of extreme, self-injurious behavior. And, I have some of my current therapists carrying around those garden kneelers, and that helps. So it's good to just be able to anticipate it. We can, hope for the best, but maybe plan for worst case scenario in those moments. All right. And with that, does anybody have any questions via chat or, coming off mute, anything like that?